Hello, friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I sit down and chit chat with a bunch of writers. Before I get to today's guest, just a reminder that my company, Unbound Writer, is now open and operational and offering a few different services, including immersive coaching and writing retreats, along with one-on-one mentoring and coaching. And very soon, we're going to be launching online classes. In fact, I just recorded two classes myself. I'm going to have a few more before we launch everything, but I've recorded. There will be a class on writer's psychology and then kind of a technical course on just effective newsletters, which I know a lot of writers are interested in. So if you are looking for some inspiration, motivation, and education, head on over to unboundwriter.com and check it out. And you can even set up a totally free consultation call with me to see if one-on-one coaching might be a good fit for you. So today on the show, I had Matt Scott. So Matt Scott is the author of the Surviving the Lion's Den thriller trilogy, which debuted in 2021. So Matt reached out to me on social media about potentially being a guest, and I was interested in talking to him not only because he's writing thrillers, but that he started writing at the ripe old age of about 40, just before he turned 40. So obviously that's not very old, but the idea of you just have no background in writing and then you just start in middle age is interesting to me, because I started writing a little bit younger than that, but not a whole lot younger than that. So I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have had no aspirations to become a writer and then all of a sudden just start writing and kind of have that moment where you're like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? Long after, conventional wisdom suggests you should be having those questions. Most people have all those existential questions about what they should be doing in their early 20s. So it was interesting talking to him. And not only did he start writing when he was about 40, he started writing about a very complex subject, definitely thrillers in the veins of Vince Flynn and Brad Thor, and very much inspired by Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, as you'll hear in the interview. But he wrote about Iran in 1979, basically when the Ayatollah deposed the Shah. So no small amount of research going into that book, and Matt goes into some nice detail in that book as well. So he has three books out. The most recent one is the Ayatollah Takedown. That is the third in the series. And as he noted, he's completed the series and he is moving on to a different type of project, a different type of thriller. So I'm eager to see what that's going to be all out. And we're both going to be at BoucherCon conference later this year. So maybe he will confide in me what he is writing about specifically. It was a great conversation. You're going to like this one. This is my conversation with Matt Scott.
I don't know though. My wife and we started going out a little bit more recently. We went to a beer fest uptown a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't really resist that. Um, but Charlotte is one of those cities that, one of the reasons I liked it when I had the chance to move down here was it was an up and coming city. Like it was a younger city, and it still remains that way. The only problem is that the Charlotte City Council spent 30 years trying not to become Atlanta, and they've spent the last 10 years almost exactly going to become Atlanta. Between, it's just they're building on every spit of land that they can find, and it's just the infrastructure is just going crazy.
Well, it's become such a popular airport hub that you're
Yeah.
just getting an influx of people all the time.
Oh,
Um,
that's for sure.
so you reached out to me and we were chatting a little bit, and
Mhm.
I think what caught my eye a little bit was that you were late to writing, as was I.
Mhm.
Kind of, I'm always curious about exploring that kind of idea of like, well, okay, you live your entire childhood, teenage life, 20s, 30s, and you probably have zero, I don't know, that's what I want to find out. For me, I had zero aspirations to be a writer. I had zero talent, zero knowledge, zero aspirations. I was business, business, business. That was all
Yeah.
my background. And when I
Uh,
was 33, I just started writing one day. And it's kind of a story, but it was like literally one day I just started writing, and it came to me
yeah.
out of the blue. And it was really weird.
Yeah.
And then I just haven't stopped since. So I'm curious to know a little bit about what did you study in school?
Well, my story was a little similar actually. I got to be honest with you. Reading and writing. Writing had always been kind of good at, with regards to essays and stuff. I went to a small all male college. It was a liberal arts college called Hampden-Sydney College. It's about an hour and a half right outside of Richmond, and it was really it really dwelled on writing proficiency. So I was kind of being groomed for it, I guess, without knowing it, but I was made to read such crap in high school and college, The Good Earth and Watership Down. Books that I just could not get through. And then lo and behold, the Da Vinci Code came out.
Mhm.
So it was such a phenomenon that I just had to start reading everything, by Dan Brown. And I'd always kind of had, a likeness to, the spy novels. I liked all the Jack Ryan movies, growing up. I
Mhm.
couldn't read the books yet, for an 11-year-old boy, 500-page book, it's that thick, is a little intimidating. Um, but when I was in college, the president of the college at the time was the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Sam Wilson.
Mhm.
And he
Mhm.
kind of took me under his wing a little bit and helped me learn about intelligence in very broad strokes. But it was a very good learning experience. And then um, I was on an elevator one day at work, and a guy that I've never seen before, never seen again, starts talking to me about Vince Flynn. And once I got into Vince Flynn, I was sold. So I started
Mhm.
reading, Vince Flynn, Brad Thor, Joel Rosenberg, and I just couldn't stop. So I kind of became addicted to it, and it was actually a good time to get into it because that was, quote unquote, the golden age of the terrorism thriller. Given the aftermath of 9/11 and things like that. And so I think I just started just kind of absorbing information, while I was reading, people don't realize when you're reading, you're not only just reading a story, you're learning the craft, how somebody likes to write and develop characters and things like that. And after a while, the idea of, just writing a novel about a kidnapped CIA agent just kind of started, developing my mind little by little. And, but at the time I was in a job that I really hated. I was not going anywhere. I was truly just pissed off about where I was and where where I wasn't going. And I went to see David Baldacci in
Mhm.
November of 2018, I think. And I was getting ready to be 40 at the time. And, I got up to the table and I asked him, I was like, is 40 years old too old to write your first novel? And I kid you not, he stops mid signature, looks up at me like this and says, hell no. So at that point, I really had no excuses not to write. So I
Right.
just kind of, I'm totally green to the business, totally green to the craft. I just decided to do it. And I just did it based on, total instinct, started doing a short outline, things like that. And I just kind of went with it. And it was one of the best things that I think ever happened to me because I finally had no boss to report to by myself. I was living and dying by the sword. If I took the character in a wrong direction, it was all on me. And I could not, during the writing process, if you're not going to fool the readers, I believe. If you're not convinced of what you're doing, you're not going to fool them. So if you try and fool them, they're going to catch on to it, and that's a no-no. So you have to be truly honest with yourself about this. Sorry if you hear scratching at the door. I have two puppies that are going out and about, so that's the
Mine
noise
is
you hear.
barking on the other side of my door. But I
Yeah,
think you're right. I think you have to have a passion for whatever it is you're doing. It might be writing, it might be something else, but
yeah,
for the author, I think it does come through the page if you're reading somebody who is trying to maybe write to the market or has tried to convince themselves they've figured out the algorithm that produces a bestseller, because
Hmm.
you don't get that organic feel. You don't attach to the characters the way you would for somebody who is just totally invested in their own right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, and you don't even have to be a good writer to be an organic writer, right? Like for me, it took
Yeah.
my first three books didn't sell, but then fortunately my next 10 did. But like I thank God those books didn't sell because they were not ready because I was still teaching myself how to
Sure.
write because it's as you know it's you don't know what the fuck you're doing and so you're like I don't do I end a
Yeah.
chapter here, what is that, and then after a while you start to like, okay, I'm just going to go with my gut.
Yeah.
And like I think to your point earlier, all that reading you've done, you're subconsciously absorbing all of that, and
Right.
somewhere it's telling you, oh, this is how to kind of pick up the pace a little bit, or this is how to
Yeah.
kind of cut this out because it's not serving the story. But
Absolutely.
it takes a lot of books. For me, it took a lot of books to find my voice. Really, it probably took six books to get to where I'm like, oh, there's my voice. So it's a long learning curve. Did you take any classes? Did you read books on writing, that kind of a thing?
No, I didn't. I did. Well, I did read Stephen King's On Writing, which I
I
would
mean,
recommend to. I mean, that's
everybody,
almost.
yeah, that's like
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to. I
required
mean, that's
reading.
just. Yeah, pretty much. But no, I just. It was for me. It was just a case of I had to do this for myself. I had to prove it to myself. So it was, where you mentioned it being a very organic process, and that's what it was for me. And it was very liberating. And one of the best things that ever happened to me was, I would outline, the story in a very short outlines, chapter 31, Carter goes to see, the senator or something like that. And I would write these characters into a scene or a scenario and going into that chapter, like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to write this guy out of this or figure this out. And through the organic process, somehow, some way, you just figure it out. And it was the I mean, it was almost intoxicating to me being able to just let your brain connect to your fingers on the keyboard and just do it, and let the ideas just come to you. And whenever that happens, I love sitting back and be like, man, I did that really good. And
Yeah.
I'll always go downstairs and take a celebratory shot of Jack Daniels after that happens. So it gives me something to look forward to. But
I think it takes a lot of work to get to those moments because, I know a lot, and in my coaching programs, I talk to people who, one of the things that they'll do is they'll kind of like, oh, I'm waiting until I'm in the mood. And when the mood hits me, man, I'm on fire and it's beautiful. But then it might be 3 weeks before they sit down at their laptop again. And for me, writing every day gives me the strength and the muscle to have
yeah,
those amazing moments where all of a sudden it just hits you and you're like, oh, this is what happened. I mean, I don't outline either,
yeah,
so everything's a surprise to me. But
yeah,
when you hit those scenes, you're like, I never would have thought of the scene
yeah.
had I not been writing every single day. And that's led me to this awakening, which is pretty
Hmm.
profound, but you can't count on those if you're not building that muscle, in my
No,
opinion.
no, no. I totally agree. And I was still when I wrote all three books. I was still working my 8 to 5 job. Um, Thankfully, I changed jobs in between, but I had a routine. I'd work my job, my 8 to 5 job, go downstairs, have dinner with my wife Amanda, and when she goes to sleep around 8:30, 9 o'clock, I would come upstairs and work on my process. And my process was always the same. I would reread everything that I wrote the day before, which is usually a chapter, and my number is usually around 1,500 words, give or take. And that stretches the mind a little bit. And then I look at my outline and say, this is where my character is going next. And then I write the next chapter. And I just don't stop until I'm satisfied that that's how it should start and end. And then I put it down and I do the same thing the next day. So when you're writing every day, I think it allows you to really work the muscles like you're talking about. And I know that that's not always possible. I certainly didn't. I didn't write every single day, but I certainly tried to write every day. And the days that I was not physically writing, I was definitely thinking about, what I wanted to do next, because
Right.
I don't think you can ever really stop doing it, and or stop writing, or stop having your brain be part of the writing process until your book is done, because uh, once you turn it off, I won't say it's hard to turn it back on, but it's harder, and the
Yeah.
more you keep the pistons greased, the easier the answers are going to come to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what people get surprised about is that you don't actually have to write that much if you're writing every other day or nearly every other day.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I had a full-time job for many, 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 many years while I was a writer. So I had to figure out like how do you squeeze this in? So I would only ever
Hmm.
write an hour a day.
Right.
And but that's still my process. I only
Yeah.
write an hour a day. And my goal, if I'm writing, if I'm actively writing and not editing or doing marketing, is 500 words. And it might
Hmm.
take me 20 minutes and then I'm done for the day. And that feels a little bit like, oh, I could keep going, but I don't. I stop myself. But
Hmm.
you can have a whole book done in 9 months if you're
Yeah.
doing that. And then you have the rest of the day because there's all this other shit that a writer's got to do,
Oh yeah.
that absorbs a lot of time.
Yeah, your
But
process saves you. Your process really
yeah,
saves you. And it saves you time. Not that saving yourself time is the most important thing, but I think having a routine and sticking to your routine is definitely paramount, because it allows you to get the best result out of
right.
your creative process.
So how long did it take you to write that first book?
Well, the first one I had to do a substantial amount of research, so it actually took a little bit longer because it's
I would
based
think
in
all of
Iran.
them you'd have to do a lot of research based on the types of books you write.
Yeah, it did. The first one was the hardest though, just because I did so much research on Iran that it took a long time. And then what I did was I took, the pieces that I couldn't fit into book one, I ended up putting in books two and three. So I did a lot of research on the front end. I didn't intend for it to be that way. It just kind of happened. And then I did a separate amount of research for books two and three. So I did probably about 3 to 4 months worth of research every single day on Iran, which is not the easiest thing to research. And then the first draft of Lion's Den was 135,000 words, so I really did a lot of overwriting, and it probably took me. See, I started. It took me probably about 9 months to
Oh,
to get that done.
that's actually not that much time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
it
yeah.
was a lot. It was a lot, though. I mean, but it was like 90 some odd chapters, and thankfully, I hired an editor from New York that it used to work for Simon and Schuster, and she said I like where you're going, but there's a lot of stuff we got to cut out, and she worked with
Yeah.
me quite a bit. And then the second draft is really where it took me another 3 or 4 months probably to really, cut out the fat and really, tie up the loose ends and things like that. And most of what's in the second draft, it ends up being what you see in the final product.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I found like my very first manuscript I wrote in 90 days, and I've never written
Wow.
that fast before because I think it was garbage. I mean, I was lucky enough to get an agent with that first manuscript, but it never sold. And probably the longest it's ever taken me is probably my last book probably took me nearly 18 months because there was so much editing that I had to do with it.
Yeah.
So it just, I think the more seasoned you get, parts of it, the actual physical act of writing, like once I know what I'm going to write about, it's like building a muscle, right? It comes
Right.
easy.
Yeah.
But I think you spend a lot more time in the editing side of things once you get better because you have a better eye for it. So now it's slowed
Sure.
down a little bit. But
Right.
it's so interesting to go back and look at your old stuff and be like, oh, I can totally see where I didn't know what I was doing here, but here I'm kind of surprised that that sounded actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
No,
pretty wild.
I haven't gone back and read my novels now that they're published. And
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've never
I mean,
read any of my old novels, but sometimes you'll look
yeah.
at passages.
Oh yeah, and it's just, it's just kind of like ugh. But my take on it is that once it's done, it belongs to It belongs to everybody else. It belongs to the quote unquote the people. And you just have to hope that you did a good job, because by that, especially that first book, I had edited that thing. Oh my God, so many different times. Trying to get it ready for publication and trying to reduce the word count. I was just you're almost sick of it, and you just want it to be out. And it's not the greatest attitude to have, but it's definitely necessary, because you have to put your best foot forward, and it's you don't want it, you want it to be as perfect as possible.
Yeah, for sure. But I think getting sick of it is I think it's very true. I mean, I get sick of all my books. You end up hating them by the end of it, and then you're editing them. And then the worst thing that happens to me is you're done with it, and then I'm moving on to something else. And then my editor comes and says, okay, now it's time to work on this old book. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh man, now I've got to take 3 months from whatever I'm working on new. So I've fallen in love all over again
Hmm.
with my new book. That
Right.
passion is there, and now I got
Uh-huh.
to go back to my ex and
Yeah,
spend
no,
3 months with my ex. I'm like, oh my god. But then
yeah,
yeah,
no,
so you get so close to it, but you need those outside sources to kind of give you that advice to make the book better. So
absolutely.
you finish the book, and then what? Because you're new, you're like, what do I do with the book? What
Yeah.
happens next?
Well, I mean, I was lucky enough to find an agent, and the book went sold. I think I got my agent in September of 2020. I spent COVID basically trying to find an agent.
Mhm.
And when my agent called me, she said, "I got good news for you." So I found a publisher that wants it, but they don't just want the one; they want three. They want a series. They liked it enough. So what are your other two ideas? So so I had two
Yeah,
vague
got a lot of
ideas
stuff
of
I
what
cut out of the first book.
yeah, so I've got some vague ideas and direct of where I wanted to take this thing directionally, but nothing concrete. So I just took the two ideas that I had and ran with it. And lucky enough, I was fortunate enough that the publisher liked those ideas. So they put me on a pretty tight timeline for books two and three.
Hmm.
So between marketing the first one, writing the second one, editing the second one while I was writing the third one, and still marketing, it was and changing jobs. 2021 was and 2022 were pretty packed.
Yeah,
But the writing part of it was it always felt so natural. I mean, we keep stressing the word organic, and I wish I could come up with a better word, but it's so true. I mean,
yeah,
it felt right. I finally had something that I felt passionate about. It wasn't just a job. It was something that it was coming from me, and I just wanted to get it out.
yeah.
So I never looked down on that fact, and I always looked forward to being able to write the next chapter. So I think the first book was out in October of 2021, Surviving the Lion's Den, and then the Iranian Deception came out in June of 2022, and then the final book in the series, the Ayatollah Takedown, came out in March of 2023.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it was I had not intended for it to be a series when I started it, but I ended up being glad that they wanted a series, because I think I brought everything uh, full circle. And when I wrote those last words and closed that thing out, I ended up being really proud of what I had written.
But it's interesting about them asking for a series because you've delved into not only the past but a very complex subject, and
Mhm.
you could very easily be like, oh Jesus, I don't want to. I had no intention. I want to write about something totally different, but why? Sounds like you're happy that they asked, obviously, for the series, and you had the ideas to bring it full circle. But what was your initial attraction to writing about Iran during the time of the Ayatollah taking over and deposing the Shah?
Um, I really wanted to write about Iran simply because of the sanctions and everything that's happened, since the Iranian Revolution. Iran has been so shut off to the West, and
Hmm.
America especially, that people have forgotten what it looks like. What it feels like to walk around the cities, or what the people are like, what some of the really good quote unquote touristy sites, what they look like. So I was really inspired by the Da Vinci Code, the way, Dan Brown took people on basically a tour of Europe, in Da
Hmm.
Vinci Code and in the, Angels and Demons, the way he did, took people on a trip through Rome. So I kind of wanted to do the same thing with Iran, but I had to do it with a character that it was very relatable, and at the same time make sure that I kept true to my story of the kidnapped CIA agent. So it's really two stories that end up coming together. But my main motivation was I wanted to explore it. I just felt like it was an untapped resource in terms of location.
Hmm.
There's been a lot of thrillers that have had Iranians as villains or things like that, but very few have really been set in Iran. And those that have been set in Iran, I don't think really described the way things look like, what things look like, and the way the people operate. Basically having to live on the black market in order to get, things like beer and things
Hmm.
like that. So it was important to me to really explore it and to separate, the people that, the fanatics that, work for the Revolutionary Guard and the people that are just trying to live and have a good life. So I wanted to bring that to light as well. But
Yeah.
it just came from out of pure curiosity and interest. I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to take a trip to Iran, but
I was
my
going to
wife
ask.
said
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to, but my wife says I'm not paying the ransom. So,
Right. If you come back in a
so
bag, that's on you.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I'm not writing the State Department to get you back.
Yeah, it's funny. Like a lot of people don't have context for Iran in the 70s and 80s, with the exception
Mm,
of the hostage crisis, right? My only
right.
context, I grew up in Southern California, and so like by 1982, for example, I was 12 years old, and there were
Mm.
a lot of Iranians in my school,
Oh
and
wow.
I didn't really understand, but of course, it was all the families who are loyal to the Shah,
Hmm.
kind of the wealthier families. And once the
Right.
Ayatollah took over, everyone got out as much as they
Yeah.
could. And so, but I had no contact. I'm just like, okay, there's a bunch of Iranians in the school. I don't, whatever. But now that I
Hmm.
look back, I'm like, that's pretty amazing that they fled because of it, out of fear and out of always, they didn't want to lose all their money as well. They didn't
Right.
want to have all their accounts frozen. So
Right.
it's pretty interesting to dig into that time period, because it was such, I mean, a literal changing of the guard, and it was such a
Literally.
different cultural, massive shift, a much more conservative shift, obviously, that
Hmm.
it has massive implications on the country. So in terms of when you were researching, what were your primary sources? Like, what did you really rely on?
Well, Mark Bowden wrote a really good book called
Mhm.
"Guest of the Ayatollah," which was about
He's a great
the
writer. Yeah.
Black Hawk Down and everything.
Black
But
Hawk Down is one of my favorite books of
oh
all
yeah,
time.
oh yeah, it's I mean it's incredible.
I think he
But
did
Guest of the
Killing Pablo too, about Pablo
I believe so.
Escobar. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. But Guest of the Ayatollah gave a really good picture of what it looked like, from the diplomats' perspective that were being held hostage, and gave some really good descriptions of what Iran looked like. I read another book about the Canadian ambassador that was responsible for housing the diplomats that were depicted in the Argo movie. I
Mm-hmm.
lucked out in that as strict as Iran is on Facebook and Twitter, they are very lenient on, or more lenient than I would certainly expect on Instagram and YouTube. So everybody's got a camera phone or a dash cam these days. So if I wanted to know what it would look like on the road from Islamabad, it's not Islamabad, I'm sorry. So one of the southern cities, just south of Tehran, going up into the mountains, there were dash cams, available for me to see, literally what it looked like. So, and if I wanted to
Mm.
explore one of the palaces, I liked or followed a lot of the Instagram accounts for Iranians, and
Mhm.
they showed me. So
Yeah.
I kind of lucked out in that respect. I did meet. I think I was in the middle of the second book when one night, um, my wife and I were having dinner here in the South Park area of Charlotte, and there was a woman wearing a Free Iran T-shirt, and she
Mm.
actually was from Tehran, and she was, they were doing a protest uptown to, to protest the Ayatollah, and we just kind of sat down for dinner, and they joined us, and we just kind
Mm.
of started talking about, the city and what her experiences were like, and that those things kind of helped. And there's, I don't know if you see it right behind me, but there's a book back here about a couple of ladies, one of which is running for Congress, I think in Atlanta, but she was held prisoner
Mm.
in Iran for being Christian, and you got to read about her experiences. So luckily, for a writer or for somebody who's doing research, if you get imprisoned in Iran and you get out, it's a good opportunity to write a book, and then guys like me can then read about it and
Mhm.
use that information to write my novel. So
Right. So you
all
had a
those
lot of
figures help.
acknowledgments, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there were some really good documentaries, surprisingly enough, on Amazon Prime. So
Yeah.
so that helped. And it was one of those things that I was not fortunate enough to have any human sources. It just that was the situation that I was in. But
Yeah.
I took the cards that were dealt to me, and I ran with it, and
Yeah.
I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. That's awesome. So now that the trilogy is done, do you want to stay within that same kind of universe, or what are you looking to do next?
Uh, I would love to stay there, and from time to time, I kind of see my characters kind of standing over in the corner looking at me. But right now, I'm working on something new that is more on the a domestic thriller front. I can't tell you too much about it because I'm playing my cards kind of close to the vest, but I can say that it's more domestic, and it is a totally new set of characters, and we'll see how this one goes because I've since fired my agent, and
Oh,
yeah, it was not a very good situation. I'm looking to start fresh,
yeah.
but I've got enough
Yeah.
experience, I think, under my belt at this point that I because I was so green the first time, I know what red flags to look for.
Right.
And going to the conferences, I haven't been to Thriller Fest yet, but I did go to BoucherCon last year, and I got to meet a lot of good people that I'd been kind of contacting, messaging back and forth on Twitter and Instagram and things like that. So the writing community is of authors is they're very supportive of one another, and it was
Yeah,
good
totally.
yeah, and it was everybody knows how hard it is to hit it big, like yourself or a Mark Graney or a Brad Thor, or someone like that, to be able to do it full time. So we all
Yeah.
kind of banded together at the bar at BoucherCon.
Yeah, totally. BoucherCon and Thriller Fest are my two kind of go-to conferences that aren't local. And but you're right. And my experience over 22 years of doing this has been that and mostly I know thriller writers, thriller mystery suspense writers, that they're very selfless. They're very willing to help you out and you help them out because we're really not competing with each other. Nobody's sitting there and be like, okay, I can buy one book this year. What book is it going to be?
Right. Yeah.
You're competing against whatever else is occupying people's attention, mostly their phone.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's the hard thing. And so, authors are very willing to give shout outs to book launches and things like that. And I've developed a very close knit group of friends who I can call and complain and are you experiencing this too and things like that. So it's
Yeah.
it's 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 great, and I recommend that to any aspiring writers is get involved because so many people have
Right.
this image of like, oh, you're the writer, you sit alone in a room and you write, and it's like that's bullshit. That's a little bit of what you do.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
you've got a
it's
network.
you have to. Yeah, you have to. And I think it's important because one thing is universally true. No matter what book a person is reading, if they enjoy that book and it's the book's going to come to an end. I mean, that's just, the reality of it. And when that book is done, they're going to look for most likely something similar.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you make friends, I'm friends with Steve Stratton and Steve Yerzeni, and I met Tessa Waggart at BoucherCon as well. And, you always kind of hope that, if you stay, within their genre, or the authors stay within the thriller genre, readers are going to go to their Instagram account or Twitter account or whatever it is, and they're going to see, they'll post about, another book that they like, or, they'll post something for me about my latest release, and you get the recommendation, and that's just kind of how the game has worked, at least thus far for me.
Yeah.
And I think the literary world, despite the magic of social media, is still a very word of mouth type business, because you,
100%.
you're gonna the book's gonna end, and you're gonna want to pick up something new. So
Right.
you gotta know where to go, and your friends or your quote unquote competition are gonna help you out, because
Yep.
they're in the same boat. Because when somebody finishes my book, they're gonna look for the same thing, and they're gonna want to find something that's
Right. Or they start going through your
roughly similar.
backlist, which is the best case scenario.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
well, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick storytelling of our own. So this is the
Okay.
making it up portion of the show, where I've chosen three books, mostly at random, from my bookshelf, and I'm going to have you pick one of them, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that's going to be the
Mhm.
first sentence in like maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence, then you give me the next one or two sentences. I'll do a couple sentences, and then we'll kill it once it really starts getting off the rails, which usually happens very quickly, by the way.
All
Uh, I've
right,
got
putting me to the test. Okay.
Harlan Coben's 6 Years,
Hmm.
uh, Ken Krueger's Fox Creek, and my buddy just came out with his book, Ed Hamlin's Sonata in Wax. So all fiction. Choose one of those three.
Mm, I think I'm very intrigued by Fox Creek.
All righty. Give me a page number between 1 and 380.
I'm gonna give you a Bill and Ted line and just say 69,
There
dude.
you go.
Sorry, I know
Uh,
that was lame, but I really couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
that's okay. It's actually, there's only like three sentences on this page. So let me choose
Of
choose
course.
one. Um all right. Out there in the dark is someone who understands these woods.
The trees talked to him. As they waved back and forth, the rain started coming down, dripping, dripping, dripping onto his forehead, onto his feet. He could feel the mud forming underneath his feet.
Bryce wasn't the only one who understood these woods. He did as well. Unfortunately, Bryce didn't know the woods well enough, and that's why Jonathan was out there in the mud, in the wet, searching for him, knowing that he would probably only find his corpse.
Jonathan's eyes searched through the darkness. The clouds low from low from the sky. The trees. I messed that up. Sorry.
You're good.
You
It's
know,
all part of it.
sorry. Yeah, no. Jonathan searched the night, the clouds covering the stars, but he knew he was out there. Bryce was out there. He didn't know where. He could be right behind him. He could tap him on the shoulder at any minute. But somewhere in the woods, Bryce was there. He had to find him. Was he alive, or was he dead like he'd been told?
Jonathan navigated his way through a tight copse of trees, scratching himself on limbs as he was getting to the other side. The rain sputtered against his face, insistent. As he got through, there was a small clearing of rocks about 30 meters ahead of him. And in a flash of lightning, he saw the outline of a figure standing on one of those rocks. And at first he thought, that's it. That's him. He's alive. But it didn't take him long to realize there's no way Rice would be wearing a coat like that.
The bright red coat stood out amongst the pouring rain, which was intensifying by every second. The man in the red coat took slow steps forward, almost as if the doomsday clock was coming towards him. The rain dripped across Jonathan's face, yet his eyes couldn't blink. The red coat had captivated him. He couldn't take his eyes off it. But more captivating than the red coat were the man's eyes, the blackest eyes he'd ever seen, the eyes he'd seen years before, the eyes of the man who had killed his father.
Oh, nice. Let's call it there. That was great.
Okay, so yeah, so that was good, man. You really put me on the spot, but that was good. That was fun.
Yeah, it's a great exercise, and I do it every time, and it's always interesting to see kind of where it goes. And I love the idea that you would just have to accept whatever. You might have something in your head, and then the other person says something that steers it in a whole new direction, and you just have to accept that. I'm like, okay, you have to just react, and I love that because it just gets the creative juices flowing for sure.
I, Absolutely, and I mean, you can kind of tell, where my editing would pick up because I think I used the word captivated, a couple more,
Right,
too many
right.
times, and
It's always a
normally I would
shitty first draft.
yeah, it's always a shitty first draft, right? I said the blackest eyes, but I would normally change that up into something that's a little bit more descriptive. But when you're on the fly, you take what you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get.
you do what
Take
you
what your
can.
brain gives you, right? Yeah.
Well, Matt, it was great talking to you, and very exciting about your trilogy that's now out in the world. And I know you can't say much about what you're working on now, but yeah, maybe you can tell me more if we run into each other at BoucherCon this year.
Absolutely. So you'll be there?
I will be there.
All
Yep.
right, that's awesome. Yeah, I have a actually I have a little funny story for you about BoucherCon. So we had gotten back, and I think my wife and I were on retreat in the mountains of North Carolina, and they had announced, where BoucherCon was going to be when the tickets were on sale. And I'd gotten up one morning, she's like, "You're going to BoucherCon? It's in Nashville next year." So I was signed up and ready to go, before I even knew what was going on because my wife
Right.
is
And now it's so easy.
yeah, I mean, my wife is just hell bent on going to Nashville because she's never been. So,
Oh, yeah,
uh,
it's a fun town. I've been there many,
yeah,
many, many times. Yep.
yeah,
It's always
it'll
a
be
good
my
time.
first. It'll be
Yeah.
my first, but I'm really looking forward to it. And I think when I did my first BoucherCon, I think it's kind of a rite of passage. You do everything that you can
Right.
when you're at BoucherCon, and this time I think I know the things that I will do and I won't do, and things I'll do maybe a little bit better.
Yep.
But I think they've announced some different things that they're doing this year, which I think is going to be some welcome changes. Not that it was bad, but I mean there was always things that they can improve on,
Yep.
and it's a very well run event, and I am really really looking forward to it.
Awesome. See you there, man, and enjoy the rest of your week. So that's it. That is my conversation with Matt Scott. That was a great, engaging conversation. I enjoyed listening to him and hearing about his writing process, his books, his journey, and kind of he's had great luck. He sold his first three books. I did not sell my first three books, so there is a stark difference between the two of us right there. If you want to find out more about Matt, and I encourage that you do, just head on over to his website at mattscottbooks.com, and then pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com, where you can buy my books, subscribe to my newsletter, read my blog, check my appearances, or head over to unboundwriter.com and you can check out my offerings in terms of immersive writing retreats, one-on-one coaching, and online classes. All right, folks, that's it for now. That's it for this episode of Making It Up. Another episode will be out next week. In the meantime, as always, thank you for watching and or listening. Take care.